before Harbour Hill rose like a crown on Long Island's highest ridge, before chandeliers burned through the night and orchestras filled the air with velvet sound, there was a child small, hungry, and terrified of a future that seemed determined to forget him. John William Mackay was not born into comfort. He was born into the kind of poverty that turns childhood into survival training. Ireland in the mid-1800s was a place where dreams rarely made it past the kitchen table. But John carried his dreams like contraband, hidden, fragile, fiercely protected. He would watch ships leaving for America, their sails glowing in the fading sun, and he whispered a promise to himself. One day, I'll build a life that can't be taken from me. When he finally reached America, nothing greeted him, no fortune, no opportunity, not even kindness. He sold newspapers until his fingers froze. He carried ropes in shipyards until his back ached. He slept in overcrowded rooms where hope was as thin as the blankets. But every night, as he stared at the cracked ceiling, he repeated the same quiet vow: don't give up. Not yet. There was no reason for him to believe things would get better, no connections, no privilege, no education. Just a heart that refused to break. And then fate cracked open. In 1873, deep in the dusty chaos of Virginia City, Nevada, John and his partners struck something the world would later call the Big Bonanza, one of the largest silver and gold deposits in American history. It didn't just make him rich, it made him powerful. But power, he would learn, does not always buy belonging. Newspapers called him the Miner King, but in the quiet corners of high society, whispers followed him like smoke: he's not one of us. He got lucky. Money can't buy class. And John felt it every dismissal, every cold smile, every door that stayed shut no matter how much he knocked. He never admitted it, not even to himself, but the truth was simple: he did not want wealth for luxury. He wanted wealth to finally be allowed inside. That wound, this constant hunger to be accepted, became the fire that shaped his children's lives. Especially the son who tried the hardest, Clarence Hungerford Mackay. Clarence grew up watching his father fight a war of reputation. He could never win. So he made himself into everything society wanted: refined, educated, polished, charming. He learned the rules of elegance the way other children learned to read. He didn't just want to join high society, he wanted to belong so naturally that no one would ever ask where he came from. But there was something Clarence never understood, something his father had learned the hard way: when you build your life around other people's approval, your dreams stop being yours. And one day, those dreams would lead Clarence to a woman who seemed like the answer to everything, a woman whose presence could open every door his father once stood outside of. A woman who would change his life and eventually break it. Clarence Hungerford Mackay spent his youth trying to become the man his father never had the chance to be, a man welcomed into the rooms where whispers decided reputations, where last names carried more weight than fortunes, where approval was the currency that mattered most. He learned early that wealth could buy art, horses, and land, but not acceptance, so he sharpened himself into the perfect gentleman. Refined, polite, soft-spoken. A man who stepped into society not with loud confidence, but with the careful grace of someone who had studied belonging like a science. And then he met her. Catherine Kitty Alexander Dwyer. A woman who didn't walk into a room, she arrived. Descendant of English nobility, raised in the language of etiquette, she carried herself with the effortless elegance of someone who had never needed to prove anything. Where Clarence's presence was quiet and patient, Kitty's shined like light reflecting off crystal. She had a way of looking at people that made them want to be seen by her. And Clarence, who had spent his life chasing acceptance from the world, felt chosen perhaps for the first time. Their courtship became the talk of New York. New money brilliance meets old world grace, a story too perfect for society to resist. But the real story, it happened in the moments no one talked about. Clarence wasn't drawn to Kitty because she was beautiful, though she was. He loved her because she represented something he had chased all his life: security, legitimacy, a sense that he finally belonged. And Kitty loved the way Clarence looked at her, not with hunger, not with expectation, but with awe. as if she were the answer to every wound he never spoke aloud. Their wedding day in 1897 was a spectacle, a fusion of power and prestige. Two worlds, one built on fortune, the other built on lineage, finally joining hands. Newspapers headlined their union. Guests whispered about the future empire they would create. And John Mackay, now older, quieter, but still driven by the dream of acceptance, prepared a gift for the couple that would eclipse every expectation: 648 acres of land on Long Island's highest hill. A gift so massive it sounded impossible. A gift designed to silence whispers forever. A gift meant to tell his son, "You will not stand outside the door like I did. This time, the world will come to you." But there was something different about this gift, something subtle, easy to miss, but sharp as a blade. The land, all 648 acres, was placed not under Clarence's name but under Kitty's. Some said it was romantic. Others said it was strategic. But Clarence felt a strange heaviness. He could not explain, a reminder that the one thing he had sought all his life might still be slipping just out of reach. Kitty's family saw the gesture as an honor. Society saw it as proof of her influence. But Clarence saw something else, something he couldn't say aloud without sounding insecure. He saw the beginning of an imbalance. She didn't just belong to the world he wanted to enter, she controlled his place within it. Still, he pushed the thought aside. He wanted love to be enough. He wanted marriage to silence every doubt he had ever carried. With Kitty by his side, he told himself, life would finally feel whole, complete, perfect. But perfection, as Clarence would learn, has a way of cracking silently long before anyone hears the sound. And the cracks, they were already forming. The land Clarence and Kitty received wasn't just earth and trees. It was a blank page, a promise waiting to be written. And Clarence, who had spent his entire life trying to outrun the shadow of new money, believed this was his chance to create something the world could never dismiss. To shape that dream, the Mackays summoned a man whose name alone whispered prestige: Stanford White, America's most celebrated architect of the Gilded Age. A man who built not houses, but legends. White didn't design with pen and ink. He designed with drama, light, storytelling. Where others saw soil, he saw marble halls. Where others saw trees, he envisioned avenues of grandeur. The first time he walked the hill, wind sweeping across the 648 acres, he turned to Clarence and said, "We will build something America has never seen," and he meant it. From the very beginning, Harbor Hill was crafted not as a home, but as a response, a declaration aimed at a society that had never fully accepted the Mackay name. White sketched designs that looked like they had been stolen from European nobility: vaulted ceilings, sweeping staircases, limestone facades glowing soft white under the sun. A house that didn't just sit on the hill, it ruled it. When workers broke ground, Clarence stood by every day, watching, supervising, dreaming. He wasn't thinking about wealth. He wasn't thinking about reputation. He was thinking about belonging. That's what Harbor Hill truly was to him. A key he hoped would finally open the door his father spent a lifetime knocking on. Kitty, meanwhile, watched everything with the ease of someone born into privilege. To her, grand estates weren't dreams, they were expectations. She moved through the construction site like a queen inspecting her future throne. But sometimes, in small, unguarded moments, Clarence caught a look in her eyes, a flicker of something restless, unsatisfied. As if even this palace, with all its grandeur, wasn't enough to quiet the quiet hunger inside her. He tried not to think about it. He kept telling himself that once Harbor Hill stood tall and beautiful, once their world was fully built, Kitty would finally feel complete, and so would he. The mansion took 3 long years to rise from the soil. 3 years of stone dust, hammer strikes, chimneys climbing toward the clouds. 3 years of Clarence pushing himself harder than he ever had. 3 years of Kitty drifting further into the glittering social world. She loved dinners, balls, charity galas, invitations that arrived in gilded envelopes. The more Harbor Hill grew, the more Clarence felt Kitty slipping through his fingers like water. Yet the world didn't see any of this. From the outside, what they saw was breathtaking: a driveway stretching a mile, lined with maples that blazed gold in autumn. A limestone palace of 80,000 square feet. 52 rooms arranged like chapters in a royal storybook. Inside, every corner glowed with intention. The grand oak-paneled hall, polished to a shine that looked like captured sunlight. A choir stall balcony imported from France, placed above the study like a whisper from another century. The drawing room, Kitty's favorite, dressed in white and gold, draped in mirrors that made her sparkle whenever she walked through. Even the fireplaces seemed alive. One so large it could swallow a whole tree. Another carved with marble vines that felt like they might bloom in the night. Harbour Hill wasn't simply beautiful. It was overwhelming. Yet beneath the chandeliers and carved ceilings, beneath the triumph and admiration, something unspoken lingered. Clarence felt it when he walked alone through the unfinished halls at night, his footsteps echoing like questions he couldn't ask. Was he building a home or building a stage? Would this mansion bring Kitty closer or push her even farther away? Did he create Harbour Hill out of love or out of fear that without it, she might discover he was not enough? And then there was the most painful question of all: when this palace was finally complete, would the world finally accept him? Or would they accept only the mansion and still look right past the man who built it? Clarence didn't know the answer. But the walls rising around him, stone by stone, dream by dream, were about to reveal it in ways he never expected. Because perfection, once built, does not stay perfect for long. From a distance, Harbour Hill looked perfect. On summer nights, its windows glowed like a crown of fire above Hempstead Harbour. Carriages rolled up the mile-long drive, tires whispering over gravel, as liveried footmen opened doors and bowed. Inside, chandeliers blazed, orchestras tuned, and the air filled with perfume, laughter, and the soft clink of crystal. If you were standing on the lawn, looking up at that house, you would have sworn these people must have everything. But perfection, especially the kind built to impress others, has a way of hiding fractures. Inside the mansion, Clarence moved like a host in a dream he was afraid to wake up from. He made sure every guest felt welcomed, every detail was right: the candles, the flowers, the way the curtains framed the view of the harbour. Yet no matter how many people filled the rooms, he felt alone. Kitty, on the other hand, was never alone. She glided through the corridors in gowns that shimmered like liquid light, her laughter bright, her presence magnetic. Men leaned in when she spoke. Women watched her with a mix of admiration and envy. To the outside world, she was the undisputed queen of Harbour Hill. But servants hear things. Staff see what others miss. At first, it was just rumors: a gentleman who stayed too long after dinner, a hand on Kitty's back that lingered a second too long, a private conversation in a darkened corner of the terrace. People told themselves it was nothing. Rich people always flirted. It was part of the theatre. But whispers have a way of multiplying. Soon, names began to surface. Not just one man, several. Kitty seen laughing a little too intimately at parties. Kitty seen riding alone with a guest the next morning. Kitty receiving letters that never passed through Clarence's hands. High society has its own language. When newspapers described her as spirited, people knew what that really meant. Clarence tried to ignore it. At first, he told himself it was just gossip, jealousy from those who wished they lived at Harbour Hill. But the human heart is not blind. It only pretends to be for as long as it can bear. One evening, standing at the top of the grand staircase, Clarence watched Kitty arrive late to their own party. She stepped out of a car, smiling at a man whose face he didn't recognize. Her hand rested on the man's arm just a moment too long. For a split second, her eyes lifted and met Clarence's. He didn't say a word. Neither did she, but something passed between them, a quiet acknowledgement that both of them had crossed an invisible line. From that night on, Harbour Hill changed. The parties grew bigger, louder, more extravagant, almost as if the house itself was trying to drown out the silence between its owners. Guests noticed that Clarence and Kitty rarely stood side by side. They had perfected the art of being together while living miles apart. He sat longer in the library, surrounded by books and letters, pretending to read. She stayed longer in the drawing room, surrounded by admirers, pretending to be happy. Inside, Clarence's heart was breaking in slow motion. He had built this palace for her. He had poured his father's fortune, his own energy, his entire sense of self into stone, glass, and light. Every staircase, every ceiling, every window he saw as a gift to the woman he loved. And yet, when he lay awake at night, staring at the carved patterns above his bed, one thought tortured him. How can a man who owns all of this still feel like he's not enough? Divorce, at that time, was not just scandalous. It was nearly unthinkable for people like them. Their world demanded performance, not honesty. So he played his part. He shook hands. He laughed at the right jokes. He raised his glass when the orchestra reached its soaring crescendo. But those who knew him best few as they saw the change. The softness in his eyes hardened into something distant. His smile no longer reached the quiet places inside him. The tragedy of Harbor Hill was not just that a mansion would fall. It was that a man who had everything the world said he should want could not find the one thing he needed most: peace. And it was in this quiet, invisible collapse in the spaces between what the world saw and what he actually felt that someone new would soon step into his life. Someone who did not come from money, did not care about titles, and did not see Harbor Hill as a prize. She would see the one thing no one else at those glittering parties ever truly looked at: Clarence himself. Her name was Anna Case. Anna Case did not arrive at Harbor Hill with the force of a storm. She arrived like a quiet note in the middle of a noisy room, soft, unassuming, but impossible to ignore once you heard it. She was not born into the world Clarence lived in. No mansions, no carriages, no glittering rooms where gossip floated through the air like perfume. Anna came from a world built on effort, not inheritance. Her rise to fame as an opera singer was carved from discipline, talent, and nights spent practicing long after the theater lights went dark. She sang not to impress, but to feel alive. The first time Clarence heard her voice was not at a gala, not at a grand concert hall, but in a small, intimate performance hosted by a mutual friend. He didn't go looking for anything that night. He simply wanted to escape the weight of Harbor Hill, if only for a few hours. But when Anna began to sing, something inside him shifted, subtle, almost imperceptible, like the first breeze before dawn. Her voice wasn't just beautiful. It was honest. It was the kind of sound that felt like it had lived a real life, carried real pain, real joy. After the performance, their eyes met only briefly. Anna smiled gently, politely, and looked away. She had no idea who he was, no idea what mansion he lived in, no idea what brokenness he was carrying beneath his polished exterior, and for Clarence that alone made her unforgettable. Their friendship began slowly, letters exchanged, conversations after performances, small thoughtful moments that made Clarence feel seen, not as Mr. Mackay of Harbor Hill, but simply as a man quiet, wounded, searching for something he couldn't name. Anna never asked about the mansion. She asked about his favorite books, his childhood, his fears. She asked in a way that made him want to answer truthfully, maybe for the first time in years. With Kitty, conversations were performances. With Anna, they were confessions. He found himself telling her things he had never told anyone: the pressure of carrying a family empire, the loneliness inside a 52-room palace, the silent ache of loving someone who had already drifted away. Anna listened with compassion, not judgment. Great houses, she once told him, can make people feel smaller than they are. Clarence didn't answer, but his silence said everything. They were careful, discreet, bound by the knowledge that the world around them would never understand the quiet gravity pulling them together. Their connection wasn't scandalous. It wasn't impulsive. It wasn't born from the ruins of Clarence's marriage. It was born from the ruins of his loneliness. If Kitty represented the world Clarence wanted to belong to, Anna represented the world where he was finally allowed to breathe. Slowly, unmistakably, affection turned into love, the kind that doesn't blaze, but warms. A love made of conversations, shared silences, and small kindnesses. Clarence began spending less time in the ballroom and more time at concerts where Anna performed. He found reasons to visit the city, reasons that sounded practical but weren't. He smiled more softly, quietly, as if rediscovering forgotten parts of himself. But love, especially the kind born in shadows, always carries a cost. High society lives on whispers, And the walls of Harbour Hill, once a symbol of triumph, were about to echo with a new kind of rumor. Because while Clarence had finally found someone who saw him, the world would soon see only scandal. And beyond that scandal, something even larger was beginning to stir, a force that would drag not just the Mackays, but all of America into a darkness no mansion could withstand. The year was approaching 1929, and the world was about to break. By the late 1920s, Harbour Hill stood at the height of its beauty. The gardens were flawless, the parties dazzling, the chandeliers brighter than ever. But behind the golden glow, something fragile was trembling, first quietly, then violently. High society still whispered about Kitty. They now whispered about Clarence and Anna too. Marriage, affairs, secrets. But gossip was nothing compared to what was coming. Because in 1929, the world didn't just change, it shattered. The stock market crash struck like a lightning bolt through the American dream. Fortunes that once felt infinite evaporated overnight, leaving behind fear, disbelief, and the silent horror of watching entire lives unravel. And on Long Island's Gold Coast, where wealth had built palaces along the shore, the fall was catastrophic. Harbour Hill, once the symbol of unstoppable ambition, suddenly became impossibly heavy. 52 rooms required an army of servants. Gardens needed endless care. Repairs cost more than most families earned in a decade. And Clarence had always been generous, almost to a fault. He spent freely, not out of vanity, but out of a desire to create beauty, to build a world where happiness felt possible. But even the softest hearts can't save a collapsing empire. The great halls grew quieter. Servants left one by one. The once manicured lawns turned wild. In winter, drafts slipped through cracked windows, carrying the cold into rooms that had once hosted kings and presidents. Harbour Hill, for the first time, felt empty. And inside that emptiness, Clarence walked slowly through the rooms he once filled with pride. He touched the carved rail of the great staircase, remembering the day it was polished to perfection. He stood in the drawing room, recalling Kitty's laughter. He sat in the library, where Anna once placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Everything he had built, everything he once believed would last forever, was slipping through his fingers. But the most painful truth. This wasn't just the end of Clarence's dream. It was the end of an entire era. The glittering world of the roaring 20s, the world Fitzgerald wrote about, the world of champagne, music, and impossible wealth, was dying. And the mansions that symbolized its glory began to feel less like triumphs and more like tombs. By 1931, the inevitable happened. Clarence and Kitty's long, quiet tragedy became official. The divorce was finalized. That same year, Kitty died in Paris, far from the palace built in her name. Clarence married Anna soon after, choosing peace over spectacle at last. But peace could not save Harbour Hill. Its walls were tired, its grounds too vast, its era gone. A storm far bigger than love, jealousy, or wealth had arrived, a storm that would erase everything the Gilded Age once promised. And the greatest mansion on Long Island was standing directly in its path. By the early 1930s, Harbour Hill felt less like a palace and more like a giant waking from a long, painful sleep. Every hallway, every marble stair, every cracked window seemed to whisper the same truth: its time had passed. Clarence, now older, quieter, and worn from years of emotional battle, made a decision that would have seemed unthinkable in the mansion's golden days. He left. He and Anna moved into a modest farmhouse on the edge of the estate, a place with creaking floors and low ceilings, nothing like the vast halls they once knew. But Clarence breathed easier there. For the first time, he could sit at a small wooden table, sip tea, and feel the warmth of something simple, something real. Meanwhile, Harbour Hill stood alone on the hilltop, an empty giant watching the world change. Where music once echoed, silence now settled like dust. Where footsteps once hurried to serve guests, weeds curled through cracks in the stone. Where Kitty once dazzled in diamond tiaras, broken glass now glittered under the moon. People in Roslyn said that on some nights, if you walked near the estate, you could hear the wind rushing through the broken windows like distant applause, as if the house remembered the parties even when the world no longer did. But the world outside was moving forward fast. America was rebuilding itself after the crash. War loomed overseas. Practicality replaced glamour, and the extravagance of the Gilded Age began to look like a strange, impossible dream. By the 1940s, the US Army arrived not as guests, but as tenants. They transformed part of the vast grounds into the Roslyn Air Force Station. Soldiers marched where gardeners once trimmed roses. Military trucks rumbled down the same driveway that had once guided royalty and socialites. Harbor Hill did not belong to a family anymore. It belonged to history. The mansion itself, though, was crumbling faster than anyone could save it. The roof leaked. The plaster peeled. Storms battered its walls, and time carved scars across its once perfect façade. By 1947, the verdict was clear: it could not be restored. It could not be rescued. It could not continue. The same walls that took 3 years to build were brought down in just a few days. Dynamite roared through rooms where presidents once sat. Marble cracked. Beams splintered. The grand staircase, the one Clarence used to walk with such hope, collapsed into clouds of dust and memory. When the smoke cleared, nothing stood where Harbor Hill once ruled the horizon. Only rubble. Only silence. Only the ghost of a dream too big for the world that inherited it. And yet, even in destruction, Harbor Hill refused to disappear. Its story lingered in photographs, in rumors, in the hearts of those who had walked its halls, waiting to be told one last time. Today, nothing of Harbor Hill stands. No chandeliers, no marble, no sweeping staircase built to impress the world. Where kings once walked and orchestras once played, children now ride bikes on quiet suburban streets. Families water their gardens. Dogs run across lawns that were once terraced for royalty. If you didn't know what stood here, you might think nothing important was ever lost. But look closer. Listen deeper. And you'll feel it, the echo of a story too powerful to vanish with stone and dust. Harbor Hill was never just a mansion. It was a dream made physical. John Mackay's hunger for acceptance, Clarence's longing to be enough, Kitty's restless search for meaning, Anna's quiet reminder that love doesn't need chandeliers to be real. Its life mirrored the truth of all human ambition. We build and build, believing our creations will outlast us. But time has a way of humbling even the grandest of structures. Wealth fades, walls crumble, parties end, and even the brightest rooms eventually go dark. But the people, their hopes, their heartbreak, their choices, they survive in the stories we tell. Harbor Hill teaches us that greatness is not measured in size or cost or spectacle, but in the courage to love, to dream, to hurt, and to begin again even when the world doesn't see us the way we wish it would. In the end, Clarence found peace not in a palace, but in a small farmhouse filled with quiet mornings. Anna found a love that didn't demand performance. Kitty found freedom, though heartbreakingly late. And John's impossible dream lived on, not in stone, but in a legacy that proved one truth: everything we build will one day fade, but the stories we leave behind belong to forever. Harbor Hill is gone. But its lesson, its warning, its wonder, its fragile beauty still stands tall on the hill where it once touched the sky.